panelists here. Chris Berry, Jessie of House Mountain Partners, Jessie Chen, a director at Longstate, which is a fund manager, JP Vargas de la Vega, managing director of Galan Lithium, and Erez Ichilov of Traxys. So investor, investment opportunity, investor, analyst. All right, so what are we going to talk about? I don't have anything prepared, so I'm going to suggest that you, Chris, and we'll go in order, tell me what you think is the most important thing that we should talk about.
Well, let's see.
Lithium related.
Lithium related, that narrows it down somewhat. I guess maybe to start off, given your love of 70s era rock, I would characterize the current environment with an Aerosmith song, Train Kept a Rollin'. I believe that's Aerosmith. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Actually, I don't know.
Okay.
So well.
Anyways, yeah, the interesting thing I think about what is happening in lithium in particular now is how the market continues to sort of, I think, underestimate demand and overestimate supply. I feel like we've been talking about this for the last 15 years, and now it's becoming more and more apparent. I think that if there is a consequence of the Inflation Reduction Act, which I think is a uniformly positive piece of legislation for reasons that perhaps we can chat about, it's that I think you're going to see a lot of volatility in not just lithium pricing, but nickel and cobalt and other battery metals prices going forward, simply because what the Inflation Reduction Act is designed to do is obviously build out supply chains, but I think what it does is injects a lot of competition, okay? This is no longer China against the rest of the world in terms of trying to find these finite resources. I think the issue now is you've got three very large economic blocks, all after the same number of finite resources. You've got China, let's call that Asia in general, the European Union, which I think is playing catch up to the United States, and of course North America. And so the volatility, I think, is a blessing and a curse. I would agree with you completely that I think you're going to see structurally higher lithium pricing, certainly throughout the course of this decade, but it does put a premium or a focus on very large, scalable assets, number one, and also number two, IRA-compliant assets. I think you're likely to see, again, another realization that there really isn't an endless amount of IRA-compliant lithium out there. I mean, yes, you talked about Canada and Chile, and of course we can chat about what might or might not happen with Argentina, but I think in general, you know, this sort of push that we have seen and talked about for the last few years around regionalizing supply chains is real and it's happening, but of course it's not going to happen without ample access to not just lithium, but I think nickel, copper, also very interesting going forward. And, you know, maybe I'll just pause there. We can get into more details about some legislation and certain names and Hard Rock versus Brine or what have you. But in general, I just don't see, to your point in your presentation, that bad deal. You know, the point where you say, you know what, it's time to jump ship because capital misallocation is starting to happen more and more. I see much more capital discipline in the current cycle relative to what we've seen in cycles of the past. And so I'm not exactly sure why that is. Maybe we can chat or debate that over the course of the next 40 minutes. But yeah, very, very positive. I think you have to look hard to find reasons not to want to be positioned in battery metals for the next 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. So talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it's a very positive move on the lithium battery sector, especially like the act passed into a law by like August 2022, and it has a mandate that it requires by 2027, 80% of the critical minerals for the U.S.-made EV battery must come from the U.S. miner or refinery or recycle plant or any mines has the arrangement with the U.S. free trade arrangement. And I think it's a very positive move, and it creates a lot of incentive like for mine and also for refiner, for battery manufacturer to look to U.S. for the tax credit, and also the OEM to invest in upstream for the subsidy on the EV as well. So I think the GM investment in Lithium America is a very good example. And also we look at some Canadian financial support on the GM and POSCO hydroxide plant. They contribute like 50% of the capex. I think it's a very good movement on the sector by the policymaker support. So yeah, I'm very bullish about the sector.
Okay. JP, I mean, so they're talking about a lot of auto OEM investment, but you haven't seen that much. Have you seen much in Argentina? I know BMW and Livent is an arrangement, but you've seen a lot of diverse strategics entering Argentina, but I haven't seen the auto OEMs in general, although Ford did sign an agreement with SQM, there hasn't been like a lot of South American and tier one Western OEM kind of announcements. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, thanks for the invite and thanks for attending. I'd like to say two things. One, we haven't seen the same speed of involvement from OEMs directly in Argentina, mainly because the project takes a bit longer. And I was quite surprised that the deal with GM and LAC was not involved in Argentina directly. So, but as time passes and the questions of BMW being with Livent and the likes, I think these steps are naturally going to progress. If it's anything, we see in the market getting tighter and tighter. And from our point of view and what I've seen in Argentina, those given that brine takes a bit longer to come online and is this perception of things take longer, my take is that the OEMs, they feel they got more time to get to these deals because of some of these projects are not coming up in the next 2-3 years. So they're waiting to see the performance before getting there. But at the end of the day, I think when you look into Argentina, there are around 10 to 12 projects. They're going to be online the next 2 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. I see that this is going to turn around. Australia's taking prime place in all of this, and I've seen that even OEMs in Australia has been in the hard rock space. They've been doing this. Argentina is just a matter of time, and because the market is not that big, hasn't matured that much. But one of the things that I wanted to also highlight, the stage that we at in the lithium development, we all talk about investment, and it's throwing money at the equation and throwing money downstream. But from the execution side, where I'm sitting, I see that not all the projects are going to come on time and on budget, mainly because the human capital is not there. The experience is not there. Finding teams with experience is hard. And even in brines, I'm lucky enough to have a good team. But if it weren't for this good team that I have, I've got a little SQM with Galan. But I don't see that this is going to flow in the way that everyone expects. And even in Australia, the key factor now to develop new mines is people. Mm-hmm. There's a strong constraint in Australia about, it's not just only mining, it's just people that understand about concentration, and every single hard rock mine has got their own chemistry. And trying to reach these 6%, it's only one company that gets that 6% and plus. All the others getting 5.5%. So when you look at what's been happening worldwide, there's in the execution side of things will take longer, and the market will remain tighter for longer. So it's this will support the pricing that Chris was saying, and you were explaining early on. I think it's the market doesn't or underestimate these sort of things. They see that things are going to happen, but this is a whole new industry with not much experience and not many people to tap from. So I'll say we need more support and we need more investment, but we need more people at the same time. So OEMs, I'll say that they will come to the question in Argentina, just to run that. And I'll say that the next 3 years in Argentina will be critical. And I think if the policies of Argentina remain strong, as we've seen today in the lithium triangle with Jujuy, Catamarca, and Salta, I believe that there's a chance of Argentina to overtake Chile in terms of production. And I will touch into the political situation later on, but I'll leave that
We
to.
could talk, that could take an hour.
Yeah.
On itself, but, Erez, why don't you pick up on his point, because you trade multiple commodities, right?
We
So
do.
lithium's coming from a very small base and is growing faster than anything else. So costs are going up. There's no question that costs are going up. So price has to be higher, right? So for me, what matters is the margin, right? You know, so there's no question price is going to be higher, but there is a question of like the execution, the labor issues, inflation generally. So how do you see that element, Erez, playing itself out over the next kind of number of years? Some companies like Albemarle may be becoming more efficient as they're, you know, they're learning from their mistakes, but still the capex is going up and there are skill shortages, but
Well, there are definitely challenges on on execution, on scaling up, on efficiencies, et cetera. But it does look to me that, excuse me, with the demand patterns that we see and the issues we have with supply, starting, by the way, from just not enough mining. The IRA is very supportive of midstream and downstream. It has incentives now for purchasing U.S. made vehicles that qualify. I think it could make a big difference for the Model 3, for example. But still, the big elephant in the room of our whole industry is the lack of sufficient mining. There's going to be a serious shortage, the way we see it, on all critical minerals in terms of the supply side. I don't think we're underestimating the demand. ESS has already surprised us with a much quicker rate of growth and adoption. And even with, with efficiencies on how we consume mobility as a service, it still looks that we're going to have a quicker than previously perceived adoption of electromobility. And the IRA will support that, assuming we can provide affordable solutions, which will, withstand recession as well. From that, the way we see it for lithium is that at least for the next decade, we see prices hovering within the range that incentivizes new projects, but doesn't kill or destroy or disturb the demand side and the downstream too much. So far, we actually saw that every time it hit the floor or the ceiling, it sort of bounced back towards the mean and to that tier or bell curve or any way you want to put it, where there's still incentives, and we see that. Look how many juniors, how many projects. Look at unique partnerships like Eramet and Tsingshan in Argentina, for example, spinning off from their Indonesian nickel, going into South American lithium, and who knows, maybe half of that material will end up with a French OEM, which is another angle. So all in all, we are bullish, we are optimistic. Yes, there will be issues in terms of human capital, and everything that has to do with, to some extent, a new industry that is still going through teething, going through learning curves, trying to find the most efficient ways, even just to build a supply chain. There's so many discussions, especially now with Scope 3 on emissions. Do you really ship spodumene? Or maybe you want to upgrade it more before you load it on a vessel, and so on. But we do see that with so many issues on the supply side and such clear visibility on the demand side, lithium will hang on. It is going to stay within, most of the time, within that healthy band of pricing that incentivizes new projects and doesn't kill demand.
what is that band specifically?
What's that band? 18 to 30 something.
18 to 30 something, that's, okay. So if you're an auto OEM like GM negotiating a deal with Lithium Americas for 10 years, is that the kind of like floor ceiling you think that is embedded in that contract?
Don't know what's their,
I know you don't know
what's their
specifically,
arrangement.
but do you think, or do you think it's lower or higher?
I think that it could be lower and it could be, I think we could see more, more space between the minimum and the maximum in contracts where that's embedded as part of the transaction. But I think another factor that has to do with pricing and maybe is less apparent is that in all these materials, whether it's lithium, whether it's nickel, cobalt, we're talking about intermediates of intermediates. And as we learned in recent years, we thought it would be commoditized or at least standardized to a level where everyone knows what's the agreed spec. At the beginning, the midstream converters and the cell manufacturers were trying to stick to very strict type of flow sheet of spec sheets. And it turns out that necessity is the mother of invention, and actually they can take anything. So there's a lot more flexibility within the pricing that has to do with different levels of impurities, sizing, water, et cetera, which make it more opaque and more negotiable. So there's a lot of fine print beside just the min and a max that attaches itself to some average of indices. There's a lot more flexibility to be negotiated almost on a per delivery basis because it's not as uniform, it's not as stable from the supplier side. So we are in a market that's has a few sort of headline type of pricing systems, but in reality, what we see in the market in a lot of these materials is that everything is negotiated to the level of the bag almost.
But isn't this similar to like iron ore, where like there's the 62 or 65% benchmark?
Not that much, because there's more in that market. What each consumer can take and absorb in terms of impurities, in terms of other in terms of granularity, etc., is already known and well established. You know, not only per type of process but per plant, what's their limit. Mm-hmm. It's already, everyone knows each other more or less, and then they just dance the dance. Here, everyone is a startup in essence.
Right.
Even if it's a big name, the specific division is new. So everyone is learning, everything is moving, and a lot of it is negotiated.
Okay. Jessie, I want to ask you, because we keep track of all the lithium companies, all the public ones, as well as the private ones, but like our scoreboard has just grown enormously. So I say that there's no oversupply of lithium, but there is an oversupply of lithium investment opportunities because not all of these companies are going to make it. And I just saw, the last presenter, nickel and gold, and they got some lithium, so they're spinning that out into the oil companies. So these companies just mushroom all the time. But within that, and the number of companies has grown, every 6 months to 12 months, narrative shift within lithium, right? So like DLE was like crazy popular, direct lithium extraction, very high valuations for standard lithium, for lake resources. And I know, Jessie, we had spoken, you had been an investor, in lake. But now what's happened is like hard rock, which a few years ago was kind of like the top. It's always kind of like maintained, but like for periods of time, it was not so great. But unconventional, like clay, Argentina stories, conventional brines, DLE stories are much more depressed, whereas spodumene projects, especially in Quebec, but not just Quebec, Liontown. So why do you think that is? And as an investor, how do you think about that? Is like Galan crazy cheap, because people have just like forgotten about Argentina, for example?
So like when I look at the lithium project, I agree with you. Hard rock spodumene is much more popular one at this stage for OEM, for all the investors, because the processing is much more easier to understand and to process it. And also spodumene 6%, 5.5% is really popular. It's really standard for all the lithium converter. And so when I look at the hard rock project in Quebec, and I see there's a battery hub there. So for investor standpoint, there's a potential up there, especially the support from the government. And also you look at James Bay, there's a lot of project along the greenstone belt. That's what the potential are. Even like they're not producing yet, even Patriot Metal, they still like try to announce the resources maybe the end of July or later June. And when I look at the hard rock project in Canada, we're willing to pay premium on that project. That's why you see the valuation differences like compared to a hard rock project in Canada and some good high-grade brine project in Argentina. So from an investor standpoint, hard rock is much more easier to understand, and also for OEM and strategic partnership, it's much more easier to get the money or partnership with them. So as an investor, we're always looking for exit or return. So in Canada, I believe is a lithium battery hub in the future with the support of the government and also all the capital from GM, POSCO, and LG Chem, etc. So talking about the brine project in Argentina and also in Chile and South America, I do like the brine project. Like I understand Galan, we're investor of Galan as well. The project is really high grade. And I think the approach is really unique as well. They try to produce a chloride other than the hydroxide or carbonate because of the human capital and also the skill and etc. So I think I look at the brine project. So the capex itself compared to hard rock is much more higher, but the operating cost is cheaper than hard rock project. Again, for the brine project, if you're talking about DLE, I understand there's a lot of player in China. They're very mature. So there's 3 types of DLE. Like more mature one is ion exchange, absorption, and solvent exchange. So they building plant like 10,000 tons per atom, like very mature. So, but the sell-out is different DLE, they need to customize the DLE technology for different sell-out. It's not one fix for all the sell-out. So there's some execution risks out there. And also based on the current production plan, 10,000 tons per atom, if you scale up like 50,000, 100,000 tons, there's some risks out there, like technical risks, execution risks. So for investor standpoint, when you look at, I understand DLE would be a game changer for the future because it takes less time and more efficient to produce the lithium product. But for investors, especially OEM standpoint, for them the risk is much more higher compared to hard rock. But I do believe the lithium triangle is the future as well. Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting you talk so optimistically about Quebec. For years, like nobody wanted to touch Quebec, right? Because it had 2 failures. In Argentina, everyone wanted to touch Argentina under Macri, right? So like, this is what I'm talking about, like shifts in narrative and shifts in investor sentiment within the lithium space. Chris, let's talk a little bit about geopolitics because I love the topic and I know you do, and JP is Chilean, but is investing in Argentina. So there's been some news in Chile in lithium, and obviously the IRA. And this IRA compliance thing, Chile is a free trade agreement, so that's no problem. Argentina is not. However, Livent has said if you convert, it's where you end convert that matters, right? And you get 100%, compliance, even if 90% of the value is from Argentina. So, but there seem to be talks. I don't want to go into the nuances of this. It's possible that Argentina and Indonesia and a few other places will get exceptions to this free trade agreement, kind of rule. But why don't we talk a little bit about Chile? Because in my mind, Chile is like, no one thought in 2018 when SQM renegotiated their concession that SQM could come anywhere close to producing what they are producing today, right? Like in 2018, you see the tweets, Joe Lowry and others, Garrett Fueling, there's no way they'll get to 150,000 tons of production by 2025, right? And they're there already, right? So the only upside surprise in lithium that I've seen is from SQM's production over these couple of years. However, their concession ends in 2020 and 2030. The government, has obviously taken a lot already with the very high royalties. There's one argument, everyone says nationalization, which is not really a nationalization, but some people in Chile are saying this actually could be good. They'll be partnering with Codelco. They'll be able to, extend their concession and they'll be able to increase their production. So there is some kernel of thought that if they resolve this, SQM could ramp up production again. But is there a constraint, on that? And how do you see it? Because in my mind, government involvement is just like versus private sector is just not going to be good for Chile. But there is an outside chance that it results in an upside surprise in lithium production. So if you both can talk about that a little bit. And then
Sure.
the rest of you can chime in.
Yeah, I think the resource nationalism conversation happens in every cycle, and it's a function of high prices. And even with lithium at $25 or $30 or $35,000, I mean, it probably still makes sense for SQM to come to the table and negotiate and give up a piece to Codelco and continue to produce because they can still generate a ton of cash flow. I think the issue with Chile going forward is, as I understand this, to your point, not true nationalization, kind of semi-nationalization, is for any subsequent projects that the state deems strategic. And I'm using air quotes because that is sort of left undefined. So, look, foreign capital is like water, right? It always flows through the path of least resistance. And the appearance of resource nationalism, again, however you define that, whether or not it's in Chile with lithium or Indonesia with nickel, or there was a story out last week about Namibia now talking about nationalizing some assets. So again, it's happening all over the place. It's a function of what I mentioned before, the volatility and just the very clear, I think, pathway on demand. Look, that capital is going to find a home. And to Jesse's point, it's going to find a home where it can generate the maximum return as quickly as possible. And also, I think to Jesse's point is produce battery grade material, whatever that means, right? And so I don't think the rhetoric that we hear from these governments is helpful, regardless of what it ends up sort of doing in Chile, whether or not SQM can expand capacity. I'm assuming they will, and that's great because we do need the units. But I think going forward for any earlier stage projects that are kind of thinking about, okay, how do we push forward? How do we negotiate with the state? How do you define strategic? What exactly is the state going to own? Is it a free carry to production? Are they going to be putting in their amount of capital to fund production? I mean, there are just so many questions that are left unanswered, in my view, with respect to Chile, that's one of the reasons why I think Argentina has become much more interesting to a lot of people, much more quickly, simply because, you're in the same jurisdiction, you have world-class assets. It does not appear that the state is anywhere near as interested in killing the golden goose as they may be in Chile. So, I'm looking around. I mean, again, there's no disputing the fact that brines are cheaper than hard rock. They all have their trade-offs. But, yeah, this sort of push around resource nationalism, however you want to define it, with respect to Chile, I think is concerning no matter what.
Okay. JP, the golden goose hasn't started laying that many golden eggs in Argentina yet, right? Livent was not making very much money until recently, Olchem, but now they are, right? So there is a risk there's always a risk in Argentina. It's hard currency, that you might have policies of higher, royalty rates and the like. So if you could comment on that, but also as a Chilean, I think you understand SQM and politics a little bit more. How do you see the Chilean SQM kind of negotiations playing out? Will this result? The ramp up that they had, which I mentioned, was not DLE related. The government is now saying they need to use DLE. So there are environmental concerns in how fast they could ramp. So if you could just talk about your perspective of what's happening in Argentina, because it's still a risky place. You have elections coming up, and then what you think might happen with SQM in particular.
Well, the contract is for renewal for 2030. That's correct. And if you asked me a year ago, I would be very worried about SQM renewing the contract and without giving up so much value going forward. There's been a couple of elections in Chile, one related to the new constitution that got rejected. Second one to elect the constitutionary that will write this new constitution that got rejected. And when you look at the big picture, the current government has lost twice. Now they have not much power to go muscle in, even though they say Codelco is going to talk to them. So from my point of view, what I stand is it's just trying to make noise. I think that SQM will continue producing what they're producing, given the last results on the election where The previous constitution that was proposed was very left, to the left. Now the new constitutionary parties that are going to write the new constitution, they're all from the right wing. So I think that common sense will prevail. As a result, I think that SQM will continue the way this is going. So
Is SQM in the Constitution? Are these two separate things?
two separate things, but that it's a different thing to go and negotiate with Codelco knowing that there's a new constitution being approved. There's the government, left-wing government's got a lot of power to see that these guys lost most of credibility and power. So even though it's Codelco trying to push forward, the contract's still 2030. So they can linger this negotiation to the next government.
Oh, and you think that this government is kind of on its way out? Like people are not like too happy with it?
Well, they will.
SQM's gonna
They will
make
make
out?
noise. They will try to do their best, trying to take value from SQM and probably Albemarle if they can as well. I mean, Albemarle is 2043. But the reality, when you look at what is happening with lithium, there are two companies in the best salt flat in the world. That's why they can increase production. And SQM's got a very good team that's been able to deliver on the promise. Albemarle is lagging significantly and haven't been able to produce what they say they will produce. And then when you look at what else can be done in Chile, and you see on average, when you look geologically, all the salt flats in Chile have got far better grade than Argentina. I mean, if I could pick salt flats in Chile, I would do that.
Right.
But knowing that the legislation is so tied up, it won't get resolved. And then the solution they're proposing is like, they're saying it's not a nationalization. The salt flat of Atacama, it belongs to the government of Chile. They're renting those concessions to SQM and Albemarle. The rest of the salt flat, those concessions being granted. So and the model they are presenting for the rest of the concessions for the new project is they say, right, you have that concession, and let's make an example with a house. You're gonna build a house, and then once you build the house, you're gonna own 49% of the house, and I'm gonna run the house, and trust me. So under any economic model, that doesn't make any sense. And the key thing is to say it's going to be a strategic. At the end of the day, all the projects coming up, they're going to be strategic. You know, in my view, there's no reason why the government say this is not strategic when they can. Mm-hmm. So where is this going to take the lithium sector in Chile? Nowhere. Who is going to produce more than the track? SQM and Albemarle. But the rest of the industry in Chile, under that model, it's going to be hard for anyone that understands investment that's going to happen. The only type of companies that I believe that can do that are state-owned Chinese companies.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I can see that because they want the offtake, they want the product. But as an investment, I don't think that the rest of the world will follow.
I agree with that. I mean, only the Chinese will be comfortable as a 49% partner because they're not thinking about it in, making profit terms. They're looking at it as security of supply terms.
And
So-
then and that for Argentina, is great news in a way.
Right.
But it's not good news for the industry in terms of more production, because we all need more lithium.
So you don't see any real risk. There's a lot of politics going on. There's a lot of negotiation to happen. There's a lot of uncertainties, but it doesn't sound like there's any risk that there's going to be a huge increase of supply coming from either SQM or Albemarle. And Albemarle is actually de-emphasizing the growth investments in Chile versus other places. You could just see where they're making their investments. It's not Chile.
Oh, they put money into Liontown. That's you see where the
The
money's
Lion
going.
Town plus 1.5 billion,
Yeah.
for the mega flex.
And then when you look at Argentina, for clarity, Argentina cannot nationalize the industry overnight because the concessions, though the mining concessions, they are granted by the provinces.
Right.
So each province is responsible for that. Now, if you want to change that, you need to change the Argentine constitution.
Right.
And that's not going to happen because when you look at what the current situation of the Argentine politics is that the current government is not likely to continue. Somebody else is going to come. And my take is that whoever comes next is going to be more open to more an open economy where the money control and all of those things should ease at some level. It's not going to change overnight. It's been demonstrated that what Macri didn't work, but if you move into stages, I believe that that can be done.
Okay.
Can I just jump in there just very briefly? You know, it's interesting. I mean, all of this talk about SQM and their expansion in Chile, they're obviously, I mean, it's not obvious, but they do plan to bring on 50,000 tons of hydroxide from hard rock in Australia. So, you know, there's a little bit of a hedging strategy there. And I think, to me, if we think about what does the optimal lithium company look like, it's almost a rehash of your presentation. I think geographic and geologic diversity allows you to hedge against any of these risks that we've talked about today, specifically resource nationalism. I mean, the Allkem merger is interesting. You've got brine, you've got hard rock, it's spread out all over the world. And so I guess one of the ways to maybe think about SQM's vision is similar, hard rock in Australia with a partner, and then they can expand as they see fit with respect to the brines in Chile.
Yeah. SQM, I still think it's still like a parastatal company, right, to a degree, right? It has Julio Ponce in there, it has, you know, Tangxi owns the Chinese own 24%, and then it has a concession that, you know, they don't control their assets. Like, so I don't trust SQM's, like I don't sleep well at night, you know, aligned with, you know, SQM's management, because they don't control their destiny. Like, you know, they're not thinking like Paul Graves is thinking. They're not thinking like Kent Masters is thinking, right? They're thinking about, they're incentivized in different ways. Erez, I want to pick up on something that you said. You said like all these commodities, right? The mining is the problem, but you have Elon Musk here saying it's the refining that matters vis-a-vis lithium, but you're also not hearing him say mine more nickel, right? You know, or talking much about graphite. So all of these things need to be mined and processed. Why is Elon not talking about nickel anymore? And why is he repeatedly like assuring people that mining is not a problem when you see it as a big problem?
Well, specifically with Tesla, I think that maybe part of the answer has to do with their shift towards LFP, at least outside of the North American markets. But we simply don't agree. We think that a lot more mining needs to happen on all of these materials. Specifically in nickel, I think we had 2.3 million tons of fresh nickel coming up to the market this year. We need to grow to at least 4 by the end of the decade, and most of the 1.7 will be consumed as intermediates that go into cathode. So we actually need MHP to convert into nickel sulfate or NMC pCAM, and it's not there. It takes forever to first of all to find the resources, then to get them permitted, to actually go into mining production, etc. These are lengthy, time-consuming projects. There's a lot I think that governments could do to help and support on this side as well, in terms of information, in terms of technology, in terms of helping the discovery side, the early exploration, help with de-risking that. Many countries in the world can find the opponent's missile silos buried at 500 meters depth and know exactly what's in the warhead. Maybe they can actually help in finding some lithium and nickel using some of these skill set would be quite helpful. The other thing is, I think, the trust issues between mining as a sector and the general population, and it's true about previous generations and younger generations for different reasons and different perspectives. And this is another way where perhaps all of us need to sort of team up and try to educate and explain and constantly remind people, whether it's just the trivial thing of picking up your cell phone and telling your 17-year-old teenager that there's about 50 mines somewhere in the world and that are required for this cell phone to actually work and to watch your little TikTok clip. But it's more than that. We also have to remind people and explain that there's a lot of technology going into that sector, that actually mining, processing, these are cool segments. There's, there's things like using drones to monitor your contractor and, and figure out the quantities that were mined on surface mining. There's satellite scanning that helps find the resources. There's a lot of technology going into processing, smart chemistry. There is a lot of AI. There's a lot of mass data crunching. There's so much going on in this sector. And really, in terms of safety, in terms of working standards, it's probably a lot more dangerous to work in construction or to be a truck driver or a trained, controller than it is to actually work in our industry. And we need to, all of us, somehow work and have a change of heart. And I think this will open up a lot of the constraints that are now sort of clogging the upstream. And without mining, and we invested in recycling, we're investors in life cycle, we're very active in that sector. We're helping to put together now a pecan plant in Germany that will use MHP and black mass in a blend of those to sort of gradually meet the increasing requirements for recycled materials. But we understand that we need a lot more primary material, and it's not going to happen without mining. It requires technology, it requires processing, it requires a lot of things, a lot of novelty, improving the supply chains, figuring out how to manage the logistics. But we need mining for the next 20, 30 years. We're all of us earthlings, we kind of cling to the surface. We and the air that we breathe are glued here by gravity. And everything that we do, our survival depends on the crust of the earth, on mining it, on harvesting it, on collecting things from it. That's the only way to do it. And I think there's a serious trust issue. There's a serious gap here between all of us preaching to the choir and a lot of people out there that are relevant that just don't understand that. And I think it's on all of us to spend some of our time and try to make a change in that direction.
Go ahead.
No, I'd like to also illustrate that the lithium sector, we had the brines, and today we have brine and hard rock. A lot of money goes into hard rock because it's an intermediate product. What you get from a hard rock is concentrate. Most of the companies in the lithium triangle, they produce lithium carbonate. So one is a chemical exercise, the other is a mining exercise. The hard rock is concentrate, you can do it, you can get there. And is less processing. A lot of that half of that comes from Australia, and probably will continue, but there will be more coming from Brazil, Africa will be next. And the key thing is, where do you want to convert that? And if you want that to be converted in North America or in Europe, that is as was being highlighted, that has a lot of waste because it's a lot of rock. So there needs to be an understanding that if you really want this, if you want the processing, that waste needs to be imported. And also, you can ask the other half is you can ask for the countries in the lithium triangle to produce lithium chloride concentrate to be refined somewhere else. That at this stage is not allowed. So you can expedite the industry in the lithium triangle in Argentina and Chile if they can export concentrate. In that way, there could be a better competition and a faster delivery time. So because the policy in Chile and Argentina is do not export concentrate, just have to do the carbonate. Mm-hmm. So in Australia, it's not the case. In the rest of the world, it's not the case. That's why it takes so long in South America to get to this chemical process that the plants are in the middle of nowhere. When you look at how remote these things are. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to generate a premium product, 4,000 meters, let's say, livened. You look at that in other parts. They're putting now in salt and Weymouth, but it's a lot of asking for something that it requires a lot of technicality. But then when you see what Chris was saying in WA, the downstream process, it went double the capex 3 years later to produce lithium hydroxide in Australia with the best companies in the world. What is going to happen in Europe or in the US when this starts? Mm-hmm. There could be more blowouts, more delays, or more failures. So all of these things are going to put a constraint. Or you put all of this into China, and then you forget about the politics, and then you get the product out. So it's an open conversation that it won't be resolved now, but I'm just highlighting that these things are the key things that are happening worldwide, and we're not making things easier for the market to get this lithium. It will be an uphill road that it'll be hard to get to where we want to go in the time that we think that we can get.
Okay, I'm gonna ask, less than a minute, of Chris. Politics, US politics, right? So big money Biden has put a fire under the ass of this sector beyond crazy, like way exceeded expectation, it's signature legislation. If Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or someone else like Republican becomes president, what happens to all of the plants that are being built in America? And like, are they gonna change this policy at all?
Probably not. And the reason is because the majority of the plants that are being constructed in red or purple states. And so I think, again, you'll see lots of rhetoric. You'll see lots of, discussions about being how woke and whatever. And, they'll talk about these terrible plants and the subsidies and so on and so forth. And how it's a terrible business. But at the end of the day, it is creating a ton of jobs and elongating, or I guess making the tax base much larger. So you'll hear lots of rhetoric about it. The only way you would see major dismantling the IRA is if the Republicans won the White House, the Senate, and the House in 2024. And then, who knows? Seems
No,
unlikely.
we want oil, ICE vehicles, let's go, come on.
It's very, very difficult, as I said before, to see this narrative just shifting so quickly. I mean, you'll hear lots of rhetoric from Republican politicians about how terrible the IRA is, but at the end of the day, the majority of the investment is going in their states.
Right.
So I just don't think you're going to see much tangible happen to change that.
That's great, because I can't stand watching the political noise and debates, it's crazy. I just focus on lithium, and as long as there's no, external shock, that blows up the demand side, because the demand is really, when I spoke here the first time, I have a slide I put up, we were hoping that the market for lithium would be 500,000 tons in 2025. Right, this was the Deutsche Bank report, right? And I was talking about it was really bullish, because this is what the demand was gonna be, right? So it's go ahead, Erez, if you wanna, we're at 0 time, so. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for you then. If I follow your argument or your thesis, then logically it would seem that investors in the short term shouldn't be in brine, because for the reasons you've expressed. Is that correct? Or do you take the view that over, say, 5 to 10 years, it's not a bad bet? So that's my question for you. You think, yeah.
Well, it's already reflected on the valuation. I mean, you just look at how it's ranking, and you see Hard Rock, and they got a premium of brines, and it's already there.
Yeah. No, but I know it's there. But my question for you is if you're an investor,
Yep.
do you say, okay, stay away from brine in South America? It's too hard. It's going to take too long, particularly Chile because of the political. I mean, what's your view?
My view is that in anything Chile related in terms of investment, other than Albemarle and SQM, it'll be hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but whatever deal comes from that, I will question the commerciality of that.
And what about Argentina?
Argentina, look, I think from discussions, at least I can talk from Catamarca, where I am, the government is opening up to the idea of potentially starting exporting lithium concentrate. And these are the current discussions that I'm having with the government, because they understand that they need to produce quicker. And I'm explaining, if we can match the royalty scheme that WA, Western Australia, has for lithium production, they like that because they can pay more, but they can get quicker, and overall they get more cash flow into the coffin. So I think that it's moving. If a year ago it was no, today it's 50-50.
So I have some viewpoint out on that. Actually, like as an investor, you're not just looking for the project to get into production, especially for brine, maybe it may take years. You also looking at the opportunity you can get added. Like there's a lot of consolidation going on in Argentina. Like 2 or 3 days ago, there's an announcement saying Chinese Tibet Summit, they just invest 1.7 billion to acquire 2 Argentina projects. And also we have a couple of portfolio company in a portfolio, Argentina Lithium. Actually, they have a lot of offer from some Chinese and non-Chinese buyers to interested to acquire the project. So I view it as another way to get a return as an investor. So, and Galan, for example, is really low chip, very cheap valuation. So yeah, it's very attractive as well.
Would there be a problem with China taking over an ASX listed company?
They need fair approval. So
Would they get it?
mate, your guess is as good as mine.
'Cause you're talking about private companies?
I'm not sure. Is it private? The 1.7 billion Tibet Summit.
Tibet Summit?
Yeah.
It's
Is anything
private, yeah.
private in China?
Private.
What?
Is anything private?
No, but I mean.
No, for an
the-
ASX,
the
yeah.
private target, I mean, if it's an Argentine company, they could sell it to China, but if, Australia or Canada is opining on the
They
sale,
cannot.
then they can't. So that's what I'm saying, like you're suggesting Galan could be a takeover target from the Chinese, and I'm wondering if they can.
Depend on the subsidiary hold the project. You see the Canadian government, they try to kick out all the Chinese investor, but even some lithium company, they have a project in Argentina and also South America, they got nothing to do with it. It's not owned by the
It depends on how
Canadian.
long, they didn't go after Lithium Americas, they didn't go after Tanco, because those were longer in the process. So anyway, it's very fascinating. Lithium is rich with all sorts of geopolitics and other complexities. But thank you, Alice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.